Let's go live button, which means we've got to wait for the stream to fire up all across the fruited plains of the internet. Before we go ahead and get started, let's make sure that we are broadcasting all over the place. And I'm checking my normal location, and it is not showing me whether we're on or not. There it goes. I had to do an old refresh here. Sorry. All right, there it goes. All right, now I can see all the different streams. It's Tuesday. We're still warming up on the week. So we've got YouTube's up. We've got Facebook. We've got Twitch is online. We've got Odyssey, Rumble, and Twitter, which means we can go ahead and get started. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group. We're located in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona. And today we're talking about the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, day 2. We had 2 witnesses called by the government. We're still in the government's case in chief. Remember, we finished opening arguments yesterday, and so we are now moving into the case. We're moving quickly, and some people might sort of feel like this happened rather fast, and it did, because we were not really involved a lot in jury selection. The judge did most of that over the preceding 2 weeks, and then suddenly, boom, we're right smack dab in the middle of trial. And so today we're going to be doing a revisit of the testimony that came out in court today. And because, again, this is a federal case, nothing is televised, we cannot rebroadcast or record anything. We're going to be reading a lot, and we're going to do some tangents. We're going to, kind of weave in and out of the testimony, and then go back and check out the indictment. Go back and check out the mind map. See if we can make some connections, because a lot of this is very complicated. This is a case that has been building over the last 2 decades, and there's a lot of different people involved, including a lot of unnamed people that a lot of people speculate are involved. And so we've got a lot to get to. We're going to hear from Larry Visoski. This is the former pilot for Jeffrey Epstein. We talked a little bit about him yesterday. He came out and started the direct exam. The government started the direct exam with him, and he didn't get into much yesterday, but he just sort of started. We pick up with him, and then in the afternoon of today's session, day 2, we hear from this victim now, this woman named Jane, allegedly 14 at the time that all this took place. And so we've got some interesting sketches. We've got some interesting sort of tangents that we can go on to investigate these individuals. So let's take a look at day 2 of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. If you want to be a part of the show, the place to do that is over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com, where we have this form. Looks just like this, and we're only talking about Maxwell today. So if you have a question, submit it in that form, and we'll get to it. Reminder that it is Tuesday, so if I don't get to your questions because we have a little bit of a shorter show, I've got my men's group today, then we will save it for tomorrow morning. Also, if you're looking for clips of the show, because we're covering Ghislaine Maxwell right now, we are going to be clipping this into different segments. So if you say, hey, what did that pilot say? We're going to talk about that. It's going to be in its own clip. If you say, what did Jane say during the cross-examination, we're going to clip that. So that's going to be over here, Robert Gruler ESQ clips, and we certainly would appreciate it if you'd shared that with your friends or family so that they can join in on the fun. Okay, so let's get into it. Maxwell trial, day 2, we start with a pilot who used to fly Epstein and Maxwell around. Remember that we heard from him yesterday. This fella, his name is Larry Visoski, and so he was walking into court. You can see him. He takes the stand. He's the government's witness, came in today for Ghislaine Maxwell. He was the pilot of the, quote, Lolita Express, and so you hear a lot about that phrase. He started testifying yesterday, but didn't get too far because the day was basically over. By the time yesterday, remember, we had some jury selection problems, which we have a little bit more of that we'll talk about. But we also have opening arguments that took place yesterday. We heard from the government, we heard from Bobby Sternheim, and then we just started with the pilot, and so we didn't get too far with him. We're going to start with him. This is the plane, this is the private Boeing 727 that carried prominent passengers and allegedly underage girls. And so it's a nice aircraft, and flying, back and forth between the Epstein Island down in the Caribbean and near St. Thomas and those different islands down there. And so we're gonna spend some time talking to this pilot. This is the guy who is connecting a lot of the different dots. Remember that one of the main allegations, or several of these, are trafficking, that Ghislaine and Epstein were trafficking in these underage individuals. and that they were also in this conspiracy to bring other people around to participate in the abuse of these girls. And so sort of those two things have to happen. In order to traffic, you need a trafficking vehicle. If you're going to be moving people between international waters and domestic areas, or even domestically cross-state, you need to transport them somehow, right? It's a car, an airplane, or something. So the trafficking takes place on this airplane. And there's also a conspiracy that is, of course, well underway. People like, Bill Clinton were on the plane, apparently. We're going to hear people like Donald Trump were on the airplane. Kevin Spacey, and even people like Prince Andrew, who we've talked a lot about, were on the airplane. And so it sort of seems like there may be tentacles of a conspiracy percolating out there. So that is what's going on with Epstein. Now, the gentleman that we're going to follow along with today is this guy. He's over at Inner City Press on Twitter. He did an outstanding job reporting. Don't know what his actual name is. He sort of goes by Inner City Press. And he did a great job today. He's actually in the courthouse, and he's given us about as verbatim a transcript as I've seen out there on Twitter. And so we're going to follow along with him. And he says, before day 2 of the U.S. versus Ghislaine Maxwell, standing up outside the Thurgood Marshall courthouse, talking about defense lawyer Sternheim trashing the victims, and those who seem to think what she said shouldn't be reported. We're going to continue. And so here's a little clip from him outside the courthouse this morning telling us about what he's seeing there. And we're going to do this. We're going to poke around. Obviously I'm not in New York, not anywhere close to New York. And we have an entire office here in Scottsdale that requires my attention. And so I'm not at that stage yet where I can devote my entire time to going and sort of reporting on any of this stuff or participating in any of it. So we're going to bounce around and check in with people who are there. And so this fellow was there. I know our friend Joe Good Logic on YouTube was there. I think he posted a video. And so we'll see if we can get a report from him at some point as well. But many people are actually down there because none of this stuff is being broadcast. Here's what he had to say when he was reporting this morning.
All right, here we are, Inner City Press, back at 4040 Foley Square for day 2 of the U.S. versus Ghislaine Maxwell trial. Now, as we live tweeted yesterday, finally the opening arguments. Prosecutor Lyra Pomerantz focused on the story of one of the 4 victims, Jane. Then Bobby Sternheim for Maxwell. Basically tore into the witnesses, saying that they've all been paid by the Epstein Victims Fund and they were encouraged to cooperate with the government for that. Now, we tweeted it out and some seem to not like that it was reported. I mean, there are, whatever, it's a trial. We're going to continue to report on it. At the end of the day, the pilot, Epstein's pilot, Visoski, was on the stand, and he'll continue this morning and then be cross-examined, and we'll be there. To be continued in just a moment. Inner City Press, we're also asking the UN about Terramar. Still no answers. To be continued.
All right, so nice report from him and nice little recap about what happened yesterday. So excellent coverage. I would really encourage you to go follow him at Inner City Press on Twitter and elsewhere, and a nice succinct summary of what happened. And he makes a good point here. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, that in this case, there's really no good guys as far as I can tell. Everybody's kind of, dirty to some degree. Even the victims, and you can sort of be critical of the victims if they got paid $5 million and they kept their mouth shut and all these, right? You can have an opinion on that without condoning pedophilia, right? You can think about what your belief is about the particular actors in this case without being a sex lunatic like Jeffrey Epstein, right? You don't have to. You can disassociate the two. So you can say, everybody in here, like we're going to hear from Jane, I think she got paid several $1 million from the Epstein compensation fund. Doesn't that kind of show bias? I mean, can't you make that argument if you're a defense attorney without necessarily being a felon? All right, so this guy is reporting and he's saying, hey, we're getting some pushback and some criticism that Bobby Sternheim was beating up on these victims. Well, this is a trial. It's about credibility. It's about bias. And if one of them got paid $5 million and that $5 million payment was contingent upon bringing forward a claim under the terms of the victim's compensation plan, well, then yeah, that's pretty biased. All right, so we're going to break all of that down. We've got 6 weeks to talk about it. and it's going to be a lot of fun. All right, so we're following Inner City Press, and they did a great job of covering this. Like I said, can't recommend them enough. So go check them out. And here's how he started. It says, okay, it's day 2 of Ghislaine Maxwell. Inner City Press, we covered day 1. We're picking up right here. It starts off with Judge Allison Nathan, federal judge. Before Visoski, the pilot, retakes the stand, he was scheduled for about 9:30 this morning, Judge Nathan brings up more jury problems. Uh-oh. Unidentified juror we talked about yesterday. They were going to have travel problems between Christmas and New Year's. Remember, this was that magical holiday plan that just popped up out of nowhere. Oh, I got selected for the jury. Forgot about that. We're going to the Bahamas on Christmas. Maxwell's lawyer, Pei Liuka, G is silent like lasagna, says we'd like to know which juror it is, or at least if they are an alternate. So Maxwell's lawyer, they have all the individual jurors, pegged. They go, all right, white guy, 37 years old, probably an accountant, like him. We have this person, demographics don't like that person. So they want to know, what juror is it, before they can make an opinion about whether they can go to the Bahamas on their vacation. So they're being very granular. Judge Nathan says, well, I think I have to excuse the juror. If they can't cancel or move the trip, they're going to have to let him go, she says. So she says, I'll step down. So she gets down up off the bench and says, all rise. So she's up. Judge Nathan returns and says, I've asked, but it seems there's no way to change or move the trip. Darn it. So I have excused juror number 58. Other jurors are ready. Please bring the witness into the box, the judge says. Larry Visoski then comes on in. He's in the plexiglass witness box. We're going to see what this looks like here in a minute. And he says, I'm okay, from within his COVID court testimony bubble. Visoski, I'm good. Don't worry about it. So juror 58 is booted out of here. She's going to the Bahamas for Christmas. Doesn't want anything to do with the Epstein case. Who can blame her? First witness gets called up. It's this guy. We talked about him yesterday. Larry Visoski, Jr. Epstein's pilot is now in the house. And who is doing the direct exam? Maureen Comey, James Comey's daughter. She's got the first witness. Assistant U.S. Attorney Maureen Comey says, Your Honor, may the witness remove his mask, she says. Judge Nathan says, yes. He's behind 35 feet of plexiglass. He's fine. Comey says, okay. Good morning, Mr. Visoski. What assistants did Mr. Epstein have other than Miss Maxwell? Visoski says, well, there were many, Comey. Did Miss Maxwell have assistants? She did. Can you name some of those assistants? Well, there was Kimberly, and of course, there was Sarah Kellen. Comey says, is that Miss Kellen? Exhibit is a woman in a bright green dress. And Visoski says, yes, it is. And remember that we heard from Sarah Kellen. Sarah Kellen, of course, was somebody who is in our mind map. And so let's take a quick pause and see where she is located. So when we go over here and we identify Sarah Kellen, you're going to see there's a lot of activity on here. So let's clean some of this up, shall we? We'll get rid of these officials. We'll get rid of these prosecutors. We got the government's witness who is there. Minor victims are over here. And so we've got this relationship between Ghislaine Maxwell. We'll close up those defense experts, the defense lawyers, the issues, and the superseding indictment. And so now what we got is Epstein's pilot, Larry Paul Visoski, is a government witness. We see that he has a connection to Jeffrey Epstein, was flying him all over the place. And he identifies this person named Sarah Kellen. Over here, she was a named co-conspirator as part of Epstein's non-prosecution agreement. In this document, we saw that when Epstein signed this in 2007, her name is right here, Sarah Kellen. So she cannot be a co-conspirator. She's precluded from this thing. So she is identified as one of these named co-conspirators. We now know that. So we have Larry, the pilot, identifying Sarah Kellen. So we've got that we can mark down. And USA Comey, prosecutor Comey says, that's this, right? Visoski says, the entrance to Mr. Epstein's Zorro Ranch, or what's this, is what she says. What's this? Oh, that's the entrance to Mr. Epstein's Zorro Ranch. This is in New Mexico. It says there is a triple-wide trailer with a faux Western facade. We had a runway and a hangar for our aircraft, so he would just fly right into there. Comey says, how many acres was Mr. Epstein's ranch? Pilot says, 10,000 acres. Gigantic ranch. So big that they had their own landing strip on the ranch, and Larry would just fly right in there. They had a hangar. It was a triple wide. They had a faux Western facade. There was a runway. There was a hangar with this thing, and we would just land right in there. Interesting ranch. And so I wonder if they had, any unscheduled flights or anything like that, I don't know, maybe. But it sounds like they were set up for that. Now, this ranch was something that was depicted in the first sealed indictment that came out against Ghislaine Maxwell. You can see this. And this was, I was talking about this, I think, yesterday on the show, specifically trying to find this photograph. This was a picture of the ranch that was a part of the indictment. And so you'll notice that they have this sort of garden labyrinth back there. And then we have a big, giant piece of property. Charges come from the USA versus Ghislaine Maxwell. The case is sealed. Now, there's a new indictment that came out after this. This only had the 6 counts. There was another one that came out after the fact. But you can see 1994 up to 1997, Maxwell assisted, facilitated. All of this, victims were as young as 14 years old, and they all came back over to multiple locations. Then when you go on further down in this original indictment, you'll see this is under paragraph C. So before we even got to C, we talked about A and B. Those were Epstein's other 2 properties, which we will talk to when we hear from Jane. Jane is going to be the government victim who is going to be talking about what happened to her when she was 14. So let's take a quick look, though, and pause on this ranch. Here's another angle, a picture from the other side. You can see he sort of has this like pool on the roof. Looks very, very nice. A lot of land, a lot of property. And apparently there's a hangar, off somewhere that the pilot was talking about today in court. During the trips to New Mexico, Jane, who we're going to hear from later, said that she spent most of her time here. It was, quote, in the middle of nowhere. She recalled the time when she was 15, someone came into her room and said, Jeffrey wants to see her, and escorted her to see him. So this guy's on 10,000 acres in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of New Mexico, with a landing strip that he just sort of has a runway and a hangar for their aircraft where they're flying 14-year-old girls. Doesn't sound good. Now, I recall reading about some other activities that Epstein wanted to complete at the New Mexico Center. New York Times reported on this back when he was originally charged in 2019. And they say that Jeffrey Epstein wanted to seed the human race with his DNA. Yeah, this is a New York Times piece. Jeffrey Epstein hoped to seed the human race with his DNA, written July 31st, 2019. He surrounded himself over the years with many prominent scientists, including several affiliated with Harvard. Even people like, Bill Gates. He's a wealthy financier. He's accused of sex trafficking, had an unusual dream. He hoped to seed the human race with his DNA by impregnating women at his vast New Mexico ranch. Over the years, he confided to scientists and others about his scheme, for people familiar with his thinking told the New York Times. His vision reflected a long-standing fascination with transhumanism, improving the human population through technologies. Critics have called it modern-day eugenics. This guy, Harvard's Steven Pinker, this guy wrote a book called Enlightenment Now. He specifically met with Mr. Epstein. I've read Enlightenment Now. It's a good book. I don't know that it's applicable post-2020, post-COVID, but probably regrets that meeting. Epstein met with a lot of very important, very sophisticated people. Starting in early 2000, Epstein told scientists and businessmen about his ambitions to use Mexico as a ranch, as a base where women would be inseminated with his sperm and would give birth to babies, according to 2 award-winning scientists and an advisor to large companies of wealthy individuals, all of whom Epstein told about it. Wasn't even a secret. Advisor, for example, said he was told about the plans not only by Epstein at a gathering at his Manhattan townhouse, but also by at least one prominent member of the business community. One of the scientists said Mr. Epstein divulged his idea in 2001 at a dinner at the same townhouse. The other recalled Mr. Epstein discussing it with him at his 2006 conference that he hosted at the St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands. The idea struck all 3 as far-fetched and disturbing. Yeah. There is no indication, though, that it would have been against the law. New Mexico, 10,000 acres away from everybody. Talking to, scientific advisors, probably had lawyers on it. Probably picked New Mexico because it was legally feasible to do it. And then built an entire ranch. You can see it again here. A lot of property, not much around it, as far as the eye can see. And you don't really need to go anywhere because you just kind of fly in and out. Once at a dinner at Epstein's mansion, Mr. Lanier said he talked to a scientist who told him that Epstein's goal was to have 20 women at a time impregnated at his 33,000 square foot Zorro Ranch, tiny town outside of Santa Fe. Mr. Lanier said the scientist identified herself as working for NASA, but doesn't remember who it is. He's got NASA scientists working on his eugenics plan. According to Lanier, the NASA scientist said Mr. Epstein had based his idea for the baby ranch on accounts of the repository for germinal choice, which was to be stocked with the sperm of Nobel laureates. He wanted to strengthen the human gene pool. Mr. Lanier, virtual reality creator, said that he had the impression that Mr. Epstein was using the dinner parties, where some guests were attractive women with impressive academic credentials, to screen candidates to bear Mr. Epstein's children. Did not hide his interest in tinkering with genes and perpetuating his own DNA. One adherent of transhumanism said that he and Epstein discussed interest in cryonics. He wanted to be frozen and brought back to life. He told one person he wanted his head and his penis to be frozen. Okay, so that's Jeffrey Epstein. And he's flying all over the world with all these leaders. Presidents, princes, actors, scientists, Harvard scholars, NASA individuals. All right, so we now know what's going on in New Mexico. Let's go back to the pilot. So they say, so you were flying people to a private hangar in a private ranch 10,000 acres away from everybody. Okay. Did you ever go inside? Says Comey. You ever go to the main residence, she asks. He says, yeah, to pick up luggage, to install electronics. Mr. Epstein was a real audiophile. He had a home theater with a drop-down screen. He had a little family room off to the side also. Comey says, okay. Forget about the ranch. Turning now to Epstein's Island. What was it called? He says it was called Little St. James. It was a regular destination. I also flew the helicopter from St. Thomas to Little St. James. Also, more electronics installation. He's a real audiophile. And we're just installing electronics all the time. I'm just zipping all over the place, installing this, installing that. He's got he likes his movies. And he wants a screen to drop out of the ceiling. Real audiophile. So he's just flying around in helicopters, I guess, hooking up Chromecasts and sound bars for Jeffrey Epstein. Yeah, okay. So then Comey goes back and says, how else could you get there? It sounds like you were on an airplane and you were on a helicopter. How else could you get there? Boat, he says. Yeah, boat. Much easier to throw the bodies overboard on a boat rather than out of an aircraft, but... Oh, he didn't say that. Sorry about that. Comey says, okay, where did you meet Miss Maxwell? Visoski says, she had a 3-bedroom apartment. I installed electronics there, too. Then she bought her own townhouse. Why did you go there? Luggage, he says. So this guy is a private jet airline pilot who's flying around some of the most powerful people in the world. And he's also hauling luggage and then installing electronics everywhere else that he goes. All right. Comey says, did Miss Maxwell ever fly the helicopter? He says, yeah, many times. And what are these photos he shows? Well, that's Mr. Epstein in front of his plane. Plane is black. Epstein standing in front of it in a yellow windbreaker with a smile. Nice photo. Comey says, for Mr. Epstein, did you ever fly to Traverse City, Michigan? He says, yeah, it must have been summer or fall, cherry season. Comey says, where did you pick up his luggage? He says, in the Interlochen School of Music, the Center for the Arts. Comey says, okay, well, I offer into evidence this stipulation that the dates of birth of these individuals are correct. We are submitting these under seal, so those must be the birth certificates of everybody else. Let the jurors pick up the binders under their chairs to see to see the sealed exhibits, but don't open it. Okay, so we're going to stipulate that. Judge Nathan says, and don't put them on the screen, paper only. Pause. I need glasses, she says. Okay, so Comey then carries on and says, okay, Mr. Visoski, we got government exhibit number 12 here. Is this the name of the female singer you remember being a passenger on Mr. Epstein's plane? Is this the name of the singer? He says, yes, it is. Yeah, that's her. And Comey says, okay, well, we're going to call her Jane. Now, remember that in this case, they are victims. We have pseudonyms. We have a lot of security concerns. The judge has even said that the sketch artist can't draw their faces, which is what we're going to see here in a minute. And so we are going to be calling individuals Jane. So we have this pilot now, and he's laying some foundation. He's traveling back and forth. He's zipping all over the place, hooking up Chromecasts and sound bars and 4K TVs, which can be so finicky if you're a multi-billionaire. And, he's just out there, setting up townhomes and things like that for Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. So now he is also going to be telling us, there's this person that we recognize. Her name is Jane. How did you meet her? He says, Mr. Epstein brought her to the cockpit. And she had piercing, he says, powder blue eyes. Oh, that's nice. Says, do you remember Virginia Roberts? And he says, yeah, a shorter woman, dirty blonde hair. And Comey says, okay, well, then there you go, nothing further. So he comes in and he asks specifically. No, that was Comey. Comey leaves. Nathan says, you may cross-examine. Then we get Christian Everdell. Okay, so Maxwell's lawyer now, Christian Everdell, is up next. Now, okay, so here is an image of what that looks like. So this is the same scene. This is an image I think came over from Bloomberg. And so Bloomberg has us showing the pilot over here in the right. We see the judge, and you can see his facial expressions are, pretty clear. We see an image. This image looks like it is Miss Kellen, who was over on the chart that we just showed, the mind map. They were talking about her. She was the woman in the green. Pilot, we can see his facial features. Judge certainly looks like Judge Nathan. And over here, we've got Christian Everdell. Christian Everdell is going to be for the defense, and you're going to notice kind of what's happening here. So you notice that Christian Everdell's male. He's going to cross-examine the male. Let's see if that same pattern holds up when we get to the Jane victim pattern. Okay, so Christian Everdell now stands up. He's going to be interviewing Larry Vososki, and you can see testimony starts like this. Judge Nathan says, okay, you're up now. Prosecution has rested Mr. Everdell. You may cross-examine. Maxwell's lawyer, Christian Everdell, now takes the podium and says, Mr. Pilot, you started working for Mr. Epstein with Dave Rogers, correct? Yes. And he let you use the restroom? Yes, like I need to now, he says. Pilot says, yeah. Yeah, he let me use the restroom then, just like I need to use it now. Judge Nathan says, all right, okay, looks like it's time for our mid-morning break there, wise guy. Everdell says, one last question before we break. Did you walk through the cabin? He says, yes, in the Gulf Stream. Okay, take a break. All rise. Jury is now going to be taking a break. Judge goes back into her chambers. And we can pause for a minute. We can do a recap. Government brought forward Larry Vososki, Epstein's pilot. He's basically testifying, flying all over the place, doing all sorts of weird stuff, electronics, flying 10,000 acres to a ranch secluded in 10,000 acres in a small town outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico. A lot of activity from him. But he leads us into the next victim, which we're going to get to in a minute. But before we get there, it's ripe for cross-examination. The defense now gets a crack at him. And so Christian Everdell comes out and he's saying, all right, so you sort of, when you were on that airplane, you were able to walk around the gallery and you sort of went and used the restroom and things like that, right? Okay, now we're going to take a break. So the court has a break, and then we come back. Judge Nathan, who is very particular with timeliness, which I absolutely love about her, she stops it at like 5 o'clock on the money, starts it at right on the time, says, jurors, I hope you had a pleasant and timely break, jurors. Now you may proceed. Maxwell's lawyer, Everdell, he's back up, and he goes up to Mr. Visoski, who had to urinate badly, and says, Mr. Visoski, I trust you're feeling better, sir. Visoski says, much better, much better. Thank you. Everdell continues, so you walked through the Gulf Stream to use the restroom, correct? Yes, I did. If Mr. Epstein were engaging in sex acts with underage girls, he probably would have told you not to leave the cockpit, correct? Objection, says the prosecution. Why would they object? Well, it's kind of calling for speculation, right? If Epstein is saying, if the defense is saying, Everdell is saying, if Epstein were, doing cartwheels back there with underage minors, he'd probably say, don't come out of the cockpit. Hang a tie or a sock on the door or whatever. It's not something that he would want you to see, right? So he would preclude you from coming out. And Everdell says, that makes sense, doesn't it? Prosecution says, you can't speculate that. You can't speculate about what Epstein wanted or didn't want. You can't presume. Judge Nathan says overruled. Yeah. So you're going to answer that question. You're allowed to go down that line of questioning. Judge Nathan says overruled. Visoski says, yeah, correct. If he were engaging in sex acts, he would have told you not to leave, right? Right. Everdell says, okay, so this was before cell phones and you were using beepers, right? Yes. I'd recognize Mr. Epstein's number. And you'd mostly hear about flights from Ghislaine if she was going to be on them, right? Yeah, mostly, he says. So former President Bill Clinton flew on the plane also. Isn't that right? Pilot says, yeah. And Everdell says, and you were told to clean up, which sounds just like an awful task after Clinton flies on it, but all right. And he says, yes. You were told to clean up, yes. Defense says, but some passengers, you were never told the names, right? He says, yeah, correct. Continues. Everdell says, I want to ask you about a few specific flights. You mentioned Interlochen, the Arts Center. Did you know that Epstein himself attended the summer camp when he was a child? No, I was not. Didn't know that. On your flights to Interlochen, wasn't Itzhak Perlman on one? Yeah, he was. And Epstein had a cabin there too, right? Yes, he did. And you flew Mr. Epstein to Columbus, Ohio to see Les Wexner, right? Pilot says yes. And he says, and the women we're calling Jane here, you knew her real name, right? I do, yeah. And beyond the striking blue eyes that you said that she has, you said that she had large breasts also, right? Visoski says, well, she was a mature woman. She was a mature woman, is what he said in court today. This guy's got some spunk to him. Goes on, Everdell says, I'm sorry, we're having a choreography issue. Can we move it past this issue without sending the jurors back into the jury room? So something happened there. Everdell says, yeah, as long as we can return to it. Judge Nathan says, okay, we're just going to take a 5-minute break now. All rise. They have a break. Jury returns late. Judge Nathan jokes, well, at least we're getting your steps in. Everdell, please proceed. So this technological problem now seems like it has been resolved. Intercity Press continues to report, follow them on Twitter, says, Everdell starts. So there were others in Epstein's world who had the same name as the person we're calling Jane. Uh-oh. So Epstein's pilot says, yeah, I flew a lot of people, saw a lot of stuff, didn't see any sexual activities, never was told to stay inside my cockpit. There were other people who might have had the same name as the person we're calling Jane. In fact, not might. There were others that had the same name. Nice. He says yes. Everdell says, like sealed exhibits LV3A and LV3B. Now, these are about people. These are names. These are human beings that have different names. They're all being kept under code names. Maxwell's lawyer, Everdell, says, are you familiar with Prince Andrew? You know, that guy over there from England? Visoski says, yeah. And he flew on Epstein's plane too, right? Yeah, he did. Maxwell's lawyer says, are you familiar with Annie Farmer? Pilot says, I've heard the name, but I don't know of any record. Everdell says, all right, well, let's put up LV4 and LV5, which must be exhibits. Mr. Vososki, do you see the documents with the names? Yes, he says. Okay, so they go down, they lay some foundation. Okay, admitted under seal. So those are some records about LV4, LV5. Don't know what they are, but they're admitted under seal. And they're asking the pilot about them. Annie Farmer, we're talking about different names. We're talking about basically, duplicate names. Did they write Annie F on there? Or did they write Annie Farmer? Are there multiple people named Annie Farmer? Are there multiple people named A Farmer? And so you can see what the defense is trying to do here. They're trying to now sort of show that the records even of these people who were allegedly on this plane, if Jane comes out and says, I was on the plane, and Jane's name, as we hear from the pilot, matches somebody else's name, now you have a question about, was the Jane that we have in court, is that the same person who actually flew on the airplane? They say it is. But who's going to place her there if we have a flight log that also has, victim A, but victim A is, Annie F, and we have somebody else named Annie F that we can place there and say, no, it wasn't that Annie, it was that Annie. Swapping out the victims. So it continues. Inner City Press reports, Everdell, he continues. So he now says, okay, the person that we're calling Kate, now her real name is on LV4, right? He says, I don't remember that name at all. He says, well, you mentioned people like, Bill Clinton. You mentioned Itzhak Perlman, Prince Andrew. Did Donald Trump fly on Epstein's plane? He says, yeah. Oh, yeah, he did. Yeah, yes, he did. And John Glenn and George Mitchell, they flew on Epstein's plane also, right? Yeah, they did. And Kevin Spacey? Yes, he flew on there too. And so it sounds like a lot of people flew on the plane. You can see sort of where this is going. A lot of people flew on that plane. A lot of different names. Might be a lot of people with Annie F. I'm not saying that's not the name of Jane here, but I'm just using that name as an example. Like, for example, what if you took Larry's name? What if you had, Larry V on an airplane, if he's on the log? Larry V on an airplane. Okay. We saw some names that were short like that. All right, so it continues, and we see Everdell says, after first staying in a hotel, did Mr. Epstein put you up in an apartment? Pilot says, yeah, at 301 East 66th Street. Sarah Kellen stayed there too. And the person whose name we can't say, LV3A, she was there with us. But not Jane, right? Nope, did not see Jane there. So now we've got a couple people. We've got Sarah Kellen, person whose name we cannot say. Could that be another one of these co-conspirators? So we've got Sarah Kellen now, who was there, stayed at that hotel along with the pilot. LV3A, we've got a number of different people. Was it Leslie? She was also part of Epstein's crew. She was his executive assistant for 20 years. Maybe she was there. But there's a question. Is she, I don't think she is. Is somebody else here an actual named victim? We don't know. Okay, so we are talking about Sarah Kellen again. Let's go back. Picks up. We saw Sarah Kellen. We saw LV3 there, whoever that is, but we did not see Jane. So no Jane. Everdell says, the green sports car, who gave that to Mr. Epstein? Visoski, the pilot, says, well, Les Wexner did. And Mr. Epstein gave you 40 acres of land in New Mexico on which to build your home, right? Visoski says, yeah. And he paid your 2 children's college tuition, didn't he? Yeah, he did. He cared about your daughters when they were in college, right? Yeah. And he says, and even when they were younger. That's a backfire right there. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he cared about my daughters when they were in college. Yeah. And even when they were younger, like much younger. College was like a little old. He actually kind of lost interest when they got to college, to be fair. Oh, gosh. Everdell says, and Mr. Epstein's had back problems and he needed massages, right? Visoski says, yep, he did. Everdell says, he used 10,000 Wave Studio in Santa Fe, right? Yeah. And when he met him, Epstein's girlfriend was Eva Anderson in Dublin, right? Yeah. And Miss Maxwell just worked for him. And Vososki says, yeah, it seemed that way. It was kind of a business relationship. Everdell says, later, whatever personal relationship existed between Epstein and Maxwell, that fizzled out, right? Yeah, it was in about the 2000s. And Epstein brought in others, like a personal assistant, Sarah Kellen, right? Yeah, Pilot says. And later, Ghislaine was in a relationship with Ted Watt, CEO of Gateway Computers, wasn't she? Yes. And she introduced you to Mr. Watt's Pilot, right? Yes. Everdell says, okay, that's a good time for a break. Judge Nathan says, done. We go on a break. Jurors get up. They get to go out, stretch their legs a little bit. We come back in now, and we pick right back up. Judge Nathan says, Mr. Everdell, you may continue your cross-examination, sir. Mr. Visoski, I remind you, you are under oath. Everdell picks back up, says, people like to go hiking on the Zorro Ranch, right? Visoski says, yeah, they do. Everdell says, but since there were snakes, one needed boots, right? Visoski says, yeah, that would be preferred, yeah. And you never saw Ghislaine looking pregnant, did you? No, I never did. And Ghislaine seemed like a nice person to you, did she not? And Vososki said, yeah, she did. And you have 2 daughters, and you let them ride horses with Ghislaine, right? Yeah, I did. Okay. And you saw nothing in 30 years that made you think that Epstein was an abuser, right? I did not. Everdell says, nothing further. Closes that out. So we can see exactly what's happening here. Pretty obvious, pretty transparent that Everdell is trying to show that this guy, Lawrence Paul Visoski, the guy who's flying around Epstein and Maxwell, was pretty cozy with these people, in fact. Had them riding horses with his daughters. Ghislaine Maxwell was, frolicking around in the grassy meadows, soaking up the morning dew. So she's clearly not somebody who's a deranged pedophile. This is the government's own witness. Larry Paul comes out and he gives the defense a lot of stuff here. He says specifically, I never saw anything bad. 30 years. No issues there. Epstein was very loyal, actually gave me 40 acres of land. I put my home on there, put my daughters through college. I installed so many Chromecasts at his various properties, it'll make your head spin. I'm a Google Home wizard. So now we are bringing this expert, or this pilot, somebody who was sort of intimately involved, and he doesn't give us a whole lot. Other than, Ghislaine never looked pregnant. If there were snakes, one needed boots, whatever that means. We get some interesting questions from him. A lot of weird stuff going on here. A Zorro Ranch, 10,000 acres in the middle of nowhere, but he doesn't, lay the hammer that he was frequently told, not to go back in that one room on the airplane. Nothing like that at all. Prosecution is essentially using him to get a lot of this admitted. So photographs and things admitted so that we can hear from the next witnesses who come out. Before we check in, we'll see government comes back out. Maureen Comey comes back for a redirect, says, did you let your 14-year-old daughter massage Mr. Epstein? I did not, he says. Nothing further. And we can call our next witness Jane, which is a pretty good one there from Mr. Comey, Mrs. Comey. Or Miss Comey, don't know what's going on. But Miss Comey comes out and kind of drops the mic on that one. I like that. The defense came out and said, he's a great guy, riding horses, frolicking in the hay with Ghislaine Maxwell. And then they come out and Comey says, yeah, but your daughters, did they ever go into Epstein's little massage room? No, they didn't. No father's going to cross that line, is he? So well done from Comey. We get a little bit more testimony over here from the Daily Mail, just to kind of fill in the blanks. Says, talking about Donald Trump flying on Epstein's private plane, says, I certainly remember President Trump, but not many people associated with him. Said that Trump's flights happened before he was president, obviously. Visoski also confirmed President Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, Kevin Spacey, all aboard the planes. He added that he was asked to clean up after Clinton's flight, but did not go into detail on that. Visoski said that the doors to the cabin, the planes were always shut, no way of observing what was going on, but Epstein didn't tell him not to come out. The famous names came up in the context of whether Vososki knew who was flying on the plane. During cross-examination, Everdell asked, are you aware that the Duke of York, he's the son of Queen Elizabeth II of England? Did he fly on Epstein's plane? Yeah. Do you recall the first time he flew on the plane? No. Earlier, Everdell asked if he knew the names of other people. President Bill Clinton flew on there a few times in the 2000s. Yeah, he did. You might be told that information in advance, so you might make sure that the plane was looking nice, right? Like for special catering and stuff like that. He says, yeah, sure. Also have Les Wexner, founder of The Limited, owns Victoria's Secret. Visoski said that the doors between the cockpit and the passenger cabin were closed, but said that he could go in the back whenever he wanted to use the toilet. Never saw any sexual activity. Oh, very, very interesting. So here are some photographs of all these people, of course, involved. Prince Andrew's name on flight logs came under fire. He was spotted taking a stroll through New York with Epstein following his prison term. Epstein already had been to prison for these types of offenses, and Prince Andrew then just goes and jumps right in. After he got out of prison. Here's the one with Trump. Donald Trump flew on the plane accordingly to this article. The pilot revealed on the witness stand. This is them back in 1997. Here is Bill Clinton and Ghislaine Maxwell. They're aboard a plane to Africa. Got his arm on the shoulder of a smiling Ghislaine Maxwell. So we've just got a lot of people that Epstein palled around with for quite some time. Day 2 of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. Next up, we've got our very first victim. Her name is Jane. This is what the scene looked like in court. You can see Ghislaine Maxwell down there, bottom left, Judge Allison Nathan, and the victim, Jane. It's a pseudonym, and you can see the face is actually quite blurred out. No details there, much like we can see in Ghislaine's face and Judge Allison. We got a U.S. District Court, Southern District of New York, right there in the middle of the screen. And so this is the government's first victim. We just finished with testimony from the pilot, Larry, and he was telling us that he recognizes some of these names and the government is now calling their first victim. Let's listen in. Once again, we're following from Inner City Press, who live tweeted the whole series of events today. This time, the direct exam, I'm being told, is being conducted by Allison Moe, or I looked this up from a couple different sources, so I think that he was just copy and pasting Comey here. I think it's Allison Moe who did the direct exam of this witness, so just bear that in mind. So it says, Miss Moe is now up, and that's about the only picture I think that exists of this woman on the internet, but we did find one of her, and so Comey says, no, it's not Comey, it's Moe. Moe says, we call our next witness. Jane is going to be her name. Judge Nathan chimes in, says, I order the sketch artist not to accurately depict the witness. And of course they did. You can see Jane's face. You can't see anything there. Might be a brunette. Who knows? Comey says, what is government exhibit number 12? It's under seal. And Jane says, oh, that's my birth certificate. So they've got that birth certificate issue. It sounds like worked out a little bit. We had that on our issues list in the mind map. Prosecutor Moe says, How old were you when you first had sexual contact with Jeffrey Epstein? She says 14. Who was in the room? Ghislaine Maxwell. Do you see her here? Yes, there. In a sort of beige turtleneck. Prosecutor Mo, let the record reflect that Jane has identified the defendant. So reflected. Mo says, what type of work did your father do, Jane? Jane says, he was a musical composer. He died of leukemia. His employer had canceled his health insurance without him knowing. We essentially went bankrupt and had to move out. Sounds like easy prey. Mo says, when you were at Interlaken, did you meet a couple after she moved out? Jane says, yeah, the woman, she had a dog, and the man said that they were big benefactors at this school. They asked for my mother's phone number. It was a landline back then. Prosecutor Mo says, when you visited, what do you remember about spending time at the pool? Well, there were 4 women, and Ghislaine was there, all topless. Some of them were naked. I was shocked. I hadn't seen that before. Maxwell would ask me if I had boyfriends. I'm 14. Prosecutor, did Epstein begin to pay for things for you? Yeah, voice lessons and clothes and things for school. And did Miss Maxwell give you some advice? And she said, yeah, that if you F them, you can always F them. They're sort of grandfathered in. I didn't know what it meant. That if you F them, you can always F them. They're sort of grandfather. I didn't know what that meant. Prosecutor says, well, what did they tell you about their social circle? And Jane says, Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, people like Mike Wallace. And how was the house decorated? It was art, and there were sculptures and pictures of famous people, presidents. I thought some of the art was odd, naked women and creepy animals and things. Jane, once again is a pseudonym, says Epstein took me into the pool house. He proceeded to masturbate on me. Then he went into the bathroom and cleaned himself and acted like nothing happened. I'd never seen that before. Did you keep spending time with him and them? She says, yes. Jane says that Epstein masturbated again. Ghislaine was rubbing on him and kissing on him. And how old were you? Prosecutor Mo says, 14. And what was Miss Maxwell's demeanor like when all this was happening? Jane says she was very casual, like this was entirely normal. I was confused. When you're 14, you have no idea what is going on. And did Jeffrey Epstein touch you? Yes, he did, everywhere. And did you touch Mr. Epstein? Pause. Everywhere. I'm sorry to ask you this, but did he use sex toys? Yes, like those back massagers. They were painful. He did it anyways. Did Maxwell touch your body? Jane says yes, she did. And how often did these things happen? Prosecutor Mo says, every time I visited his house. Did you travel to his other homes? Yes, I did. Okay, we'll get back to that. When other people were present, tell me this, how did the incidents start? Jane says Jeffrey would say to follow him. Follow him where? Back over to his bedroom or to the massage room. He would get on the massage table and it would sort of turn into this orgy. How often was Maxwell present? Jane says, I can't give a precise number. During the incident when you were 14, was Maxwell in the room? Jane says, yes, she was. When you were 14, when you were 15 and 16, how many times did you travel with them, Epstein and Maxwell? About 10 times, she says. New York City and New Mexico, on Jeffrey's plane. And what kind of artwork did they have? It was weird, animal heads and naked women and orgies. It didn't seem very unusual at this point. And how did you feel in the New York house? Jane says, I felt like someone was always watching you. This is the New York house, as you can see. There was a massage room in this building. Same building that we saw in the original the original indictment, the sealed indictment, that came out when Ghislaine was officially originally being prosecuted. It's a multi-story private residence, Upper East Side of Manhattan. Maxwell, for many years, apparently was participating in that. Another one of the locations that Jane tells us about is this location, Palm Beach, Florida, 1993. She said, sort of described it as, being 12 going on 13. Father died of leukemia. So Epstein sees a victim and sweeps on in. Again, another photograph from the original indictment. So they're just walking through the indictment step by step. We go back to the testimony. Allison Moe, I think, is still doing the cross. Says, what would Epstein ask you to do? Jane says, straddle his face, to pinch his nipples. Were there times when Maxwell was present? Yeah. In the New York house, where did this happen? Well, it was in the massage room, Jane says. And on the trip to New Mexico, where did you spend most of your time there? On the ranch, it was in the middle of nowhere. And did anyone come into your room? Yeah. Someone came in and said, Jeffrey wants to see you, and they escorted me to see him. Jane is now sobbing in court. Says, I did not want to go see him. Who told you Epstein wanted to see you? Don't know. I had to fly back to Florida to go to school. I took a commercial flight, but I was only 15 and I didn't have a driver's learner's permit. So I couldn't get on the flight back to Florida having no ID. I freaked out, but Maxwell helped me solve it. She talked to someone and I got on the plane. What was your home life like at the time? Well, we were losing our home. We moved into a pool house, she tells the prosecutor. Jane says, my mom was enamored by the idea that these affluent people were taking an interest in me. Maxwell's team says, objection. That's hearsay. They're saying that's an out-of-court statement. Objection. You can't talk about that. Prosecutors respond. They say it's for the effect on the listener. Judge Nathan says, all right, calm down, everybody. You may ask that question, but not what the mother said. U.S. Attorney says, can we approach Judge? Prosecutor. Judge Nathan says, well, the jurors' snacks are here. Let's take a 10-minute break. Prosecutors are quite aggressive in this case. They don't want that to be the final answer. Can we approach is what they're asking. The judge issued a ruling and said, you may ask that question, but not what the mother said. Start over. U.S. Attorney said, we're not happy with that. Can we approach? Judge, we don't want to debate this with you right in front of the jurors. Can we come up and talk to you about this? The prosecutors say this. And judge says, hold on, no, it's fine. Snacks are here. Go get your Hot Pockets, jurors, and come on back in 10 minutes. So they probably, leave at that moment. And then they address it. Once again, talking about the affluent people and why this woman's mother, Jane's mother, might have been interested in sort of turning her over to Epstein and Maxwell. So they go and they have a break. Meanwhile, Ghislaine, you can see her in her beige outfit as detailed by this artist, says she didn't react to any of the women's testimony, including when Jane pointed her out in court to identify her. So Ghislaine Maxwell just has a poker face, and she's carrying on as she should. So the break comes back, testimony comes back, and it sounds like they're going to be able to get that answer or that question in. So remember, the defense objected. They said they can't ask about her mother and what her mother said. Well, we come back and they start back off with that question. What did your mother say? says Miss Mo. Jane says, well, that I should be grateful for their attention. A lot of people here have been asking, where are the parents of these women? Where have they been? Here you have an answer. Very poor family. Mother was doing cartwheels. Oh, they're going to give you money and pay for college, and I don't have to worry about you, and you can fly all over the country on airplanes. Not my problem. Sounds great. A prosecutor says, did you tell your siblings about the abuse? No, I didn't. I was ashamed. I had a manic, depressed mother who didn't know how to cope. It seemed hopeless. She's sobbing now in court. Jane says, I spoke to my school guidance counselor, who then called my mother. My mother told me, says, you don't talk about what happens at home and embarrass us. You keep your mouth shut. Family business is family business. Don't tell your guidance counselor about any of this stuff. Line of questioning continues. Mo says, Jane, what kind of work do you do now? Well, Jane said, I'm still an actor. I got work in LA, but I didn't know how to trust or how to reciprocate. When did you stop being in touch with Epstein? In 2002, I fell in love with someone. Jane says, Epstein kept calling me and saying that he wanted to see me, that I needed to be grateful to him, that my mother was living in one of his apartments. Do you want me to continue, she says? Was that the last time? Yes, it was, Jane says. And later, did you tell the man I'll call Matt about Epstein? Yes, not in detail, but I did. And then you saw Epstein on the TV all the time. He had been arrested. Did the FBI interview you in September 2019? Yes, they did. And it starts from there. We get another little snippet of the testimony from this exchange. Jane said that she was confused by the exact relationship between the two of them. Thought they were married, talking about Epstein and Maxwell. Thought that they were married. Said that Maxwell was about the same age as her older sister. Mo says, how old were you when you first started spending time with them? 14, she says. Early incident, which left Jane shocked, was that incident by the pool where they were out there topless. Never saw that before. Jane described Maxwell as being, quote, a bit odd and quirky. But, she used to tease me, but she was nice. Jane said, I think she may have said I'm like an older sister to you. At the time, Jane's older sister was 27. Maxwell was in her early 30s. Epstein also began to give Jane money as she left the house after each visit, which were around every week or two, telling her that her mother was having a hard time. It's not a big deal. Epstein began used to buy Jane clothes and other things. And we already heard about that quote. So sort of a different take, a different angle. We go back to Inner City Press. We go back to May 2019. Remember, Epstein is now dead. Jane says, did you sue Ghislaine Maxwell? Yes, I did in 2020. Remember when we were talking about Gage Grosskreutz? Remember he was suing the city of Kenosha, $10 million? We talked about his bias in that case. Seeing the same arguments here. Did you sue Ghislaine Maxwell? Yes, in 2020. And the Epstein's Victims Fund? Yeah. They awarded me $5 million. Of that, I got approximately $2.9 million. Wow. Would the verdict in this case impact that? Says the prosecutor. Defense screams, objection! You don't get to say that. They go up for a sidebar and they get to come back. Objection's overruled. Prosecutor says, would a verdict here impact that? Jane says, no. Doesn't change that at all. I'm not biased by that money. I've already got it. It's in my bank account. It's accruing 1% interest annually. Leave me alone. So a verdict would not impact that. Jane says no. Judge Nathan says, jurors, listen, this is not a legal opinion, right? She's not qualified to give you that opinion. So the prosecutor says, well, why do you want to be anonymous? She says, well, I work in Hollywood and victim shaming is still the norm, she says. All right, that's why she doesn't want to reveal who she is. Prosecutor Mo says, all right, no further questions there. So she's done. Jane comes out We learn a little bit more about her. $5 million paid out. She got $2.9 million of that. Taxes are the worst. Somebody who got involved in all of this when she was extremely young, age 14. Massage room. She traveled multiple different locations in New York and in New Mexico. And she was examined by Allison Moe. We saw that the direct exam of the first witness, Epstein's pilot, was conducted by Maureen Comey, and the cross-examination was done by Christian Everdell. Now, the cross-examination, not going to be done by Christian Everdell. He's a man. So they're going to bring out Laura Menninger, a woman, a female, to come out and do the cross-examination of Jane. Don't want to bring a man out here to beat up Jane legally or physically. Judge Nathan says, Miss Menninger, you may cross-examine. Go ahead whenever you're ready, please. Maxwell's lawyer, Menninger, says, Jane, you waited 20 years to complain. Is that right? And Jane says, yeah, that's right. 2 full decades before your first report to the police. Epstein was dead at that time. Is that right? Jane says, yeah, that's correct. Okay, 20 years. Epstein's already dead. Got it. All right. And says, and you had 2 personal injury attorneys with you, right? You've got Mr. Glaxman and Mr. Workman, and you've got the U.S. attorney, Miss Moe, we just heard from. And Jane says, yeah. And says, in the 20 years, you spoke to several people close to you, to the person we're referring to, Matt. Your sister, Camilla, objection, says the prosecution. Your sister, Camilla? Ooh, who was your sister, Camilla? Now, this is interesting, isn't it? Because we have a name now. We have a name. We have Camilla, who is the sister of Jane. So Jane, whatever her real name is, she might have a sister named Camilla. Prosecution screams about that. There's a sidebar. Now they return. Menninger starts back up. So we're not going to ask about your sister Camilla anymore. We're just going to get rid of that name. Just going to delete that. Whoops. Oops. Sorry about that. And Menninger comes back out and says, oh, okay, so you told one of your older sisters, right? Not Camilla. You're one of your older sisters. And Jane says, yeah, right. But you didn't mention Ghislaine Maxwell, did you? I don't know. Says, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I talked to a lot of people about this. You told one of your sisters, right? And you didn't mention Ghislaine, right? I don't know. And you have 4 older siblings. Jane says, well, 1 older siblings and 3 older half-siblings. Menninger says, show the witness 3509 through 0008, please. And these are disclosure exhibits that go up on the screen. Prosecutors object. Very unhappy. They say, Judge, we object to this. Don't show her any of that stuff. She'd just be reading the document, not in evidence. She can refresh her, and Menninger chimes back out and says, sit down there, young fella. I'm not refreshing. I'm impeaching, which is a difference. 2 different legal techniques. Okay, you don't just get to put documents up to people and just say, can you please read from that up there? You got to have a reason for showing people things. And one of them, if it's refreshing their recollection, they don't actually get to read from that document. They can refresh their recollection and then testify from their memory. If they don't remember something, you can show an officer a police report, for example, and you can, do you remember that day? I don't remember. Well, if I showed you your report that you wrote everything down in, would that refresh your recollection? Yeah, it actually would. Great. All right, you show them the report. They flip through it. They don't read it to the jurors or the judges. Flip through it. Okay. Spend 5 minutes on it, 2 minutes on it. Okay, do you remember now? Is your memory refreshed? And they go, yeah, it is now, thankfully. Oh, great. Okay, so now tell me what happened. And that's different. What Laura Menninger is trying to do is just put it up on the screen. And the prosecution, you can't do that. What, you wanted to just read from the screen? That's ridiculous. If you want to refresh her recollection, that's fine. Show her the paper documents, but don't put it up on the screen. Menninger says, I'm not trying to refresh their recollection here, guys. It's impeachment material. I'm about to blast this person on it. Judge Nathan says, well, you're not impeaching anybody yet there, Miss Menninger. The objection is sustained. Don't put that on the screen. I'm going to reach the document to myself, she says. Menninger says, you told Miss Moe that you lived in the same house, blank. Objection, the prosecutor screams again. Again, no foundation. So Miss Menninger is having a difficult time on this one. She's getting objections left and right. The last one was just sustained. They say, I'm going to show you these documents, 3509 to 008, and I'm going to put that on the screen. Prosecution says, no, can't do that. Judge says, yeah, they're right. Can't do that. Not going to allow that to happen. So she jumps right into her next line of questioning. All right, fine. Jane, you also said that you lived in the same house as blank. Objection. No foundation, the prosecution says. You don't have any basis for talking about that at all. So Menninger says, listen, I wasn't going to ask for the street address. I was going to ask if she knows it, where the country club is. I don't know, Jane says. I've never been to a country club. Menninger says, I'd like to show the witness another sealed document. Jane says, I recognize my mother's signature. I recognize mine, but I don't recognize the document. Menninger says, well, what do you believe this document to be? U.S. attorneys, objection again. They're like 3 for 3 on this. Judge Nathan says, sustained. Calls for speculation. What do you believe this document to be? I mean, what, I don't know. Looks like a magical ticket to Mr. Fairyland. I don't know what it is. Not qualified to speculate about it. So Menninger, 3 objections, 3 sustained from what we can count here. We've got the first one on this about showing the documents. We have another one about the objection to living in the same house. And we have a third one about a question about what she speculates the document to be. 3 for 3, 0 for 3, Laura Menninger. Now, Menninger continues and says, how about this page? Judge Nathan says, so Menninger's, kind of dialing this in a little bit. And remember now that, this is not unusual. We're sort of getting our sea legs under us. Prosecution is feeling out how the direct exam cross-examinations are going to go, being very aggressive with their objections. The defense is now thinking about, what can we get away with? What can I ask or not ask? And so you remember in the movie Jurassic Park where the velociraptors are not getting zapped by the electric fence. And that really smart Australian guy says something like, they're testing the fence for weakness. And there's that ominous music that plays in the background. And you say, uh-oh. Those velociraptors are going to be trouble. I can feel it. And it turns out they were testing for weakness. It's kind of what both sides are doing right now. They're testing each other for weakness, trying to figure out what's happening. So Menninger now continues. She tightens back up her line of direct exam, says, well, how about this page? Judge Nathan says, you should do this on paper. I always thought that was a better idea, not the screen. We had a battle about this a couple days ago. So this is J5, right? And the question is, do you recognize the document? Jane says, yeah, I do. It's the application to the camp that I went to. And Menninger says, and is your signature on the second page? Jane says, yeah, it's dated 5/7/94. So she's quite young. She was, no, that's not her birth date. That's when she applied for camp. So yeah, she's not born in 1994 because this happened like 2 decades prior to that. Before you met Epstein, right? Did you apply for financial aid or scholarship? Let them offer it into evidence under seal. So it's all going to be offered in there. And Judge Nathan orders it in. Defense attorney says, so you did not apply for aid. Jane says, yeah, I guess not. I was a child. So yeah, Judge Nathan says, it's 5 o'clock and we're going to break. Just when it's about to get good. Menninger is about to impeach her, say, did you apply for financial aid or scholarship? And in fact, you didn't. And I got these new documents admitted. And Judge Nathan, the bell Rings 5 o'clock, says, we're going to break. All rise, jury leaves. Judge Nathan says, no communications on substance here between the U.S. and the witness. In other words, the U.S. should not be talking to Jane. If there's any conversation between these prosecutors and Jane, that's a big problem. She's still under cross-examination. So they should not be trying to, paper over any problems with her. Be seated. Judge Nathan then wraps up. We've got a couple things to attend to before the court is adjourned for the day. Says, we have some matters to take up. And the prosecutors come back out and they say, Judge, listen, the defense never showed up these documents. They violated Rule 16. And Maxwell's lawyer says the rule does not apply. So there were some documents they're fighting over. Prosecutor says, well, if the rule doesn't apply, then it's not admissible. So judge says it's what, on page J36? How does it impeach anybody? The defense says, well, it shows the street she lives on. So talking about Jane. Nathan says it's a current photo. It's not impeaching. And the prosecutor says it's a violation of Rule 16 anyways. So we would ask that the court direct them to produce it. Defense response says, but today we've seen, you've admitted a photo of Epstein's home today. And Judge Nathan says, yeah, but they had their witness saying it's a fair and accurate representation. So the prosecutor says, all right, we're going to brief it. We're going to report on it. Judge Nathan says, give me your letters on this by 9 p.m. tonight. And now we're going to deal with the identifying information. So we're going to speak to the defense about it this evening. Judge Nathan closes out the day, says, the witness is on cross. Do you agree they can talk to her? Then raise it to me in a letter tonight. We'll confer right after the court date today. We're going to submit letters to you, Judge, by 10 p.m. tonight. Judge Nathan says, fine. And then Matt is going to be the next witness. So we're going to finish up with the cross-examination tomorrow. And I'm sure we're going to have a redirect as well. So tomorrow we'll see that Ghislaine, defense attorney Laura Menninger, will continue with the cross-examination. And then probably Allison Moe will come back and do a redirect of the victim, Jane. And then we're going to jump right into Matt. That's going to be the next witness that the U.S. government calls. And so we've got a few minutes before I got to scoot on out of here. So let's make sure we get to some of these questions from our friends at watchingthewatchers.locals.com before we wrap it up for the day. Let's see what we've got here. And I'm now having to interface with the mind map as well. I have another moving part. All right. First one up is from Kincaid. Says, good day, Rob. I was a little late posting this, so I added more. Apologies. The comment from yesterday was about jury duty. If they're paid too little, obligation and honor can suffer. Some have brought up elements of relativism, the sense of a perceived personal internalization and exposure and relevance to a society and observer. Okay, Kincaid, we're going to read that tomorrow morning that's a heavy topic. That's a heavy comment. So we'll save that one for tomorrow morning. Speech Unleashed says, why are federal cases not allowed to be televised or rebroadcast? What makes the federal ones different than the state ones with regard to televising them? It's just the rules. That's it, Speech. There's nothing else interesting about it. It's just the rules. That's how it's been that way forever. And there've been, some trial balloons, no pun intended. There's been some attempts to try to open it up a little bit, but never happened. Monster One says, they said originally the juror's trip was a surprise Christmas gift. It seemed to me that the juror probably went home and was like, guess what, babe? I made the jury trial. It will last 6 weeks. Significant other was like, uh-oh, this was supposed to be a surprise, but I booked us a Christmas vacation. Oops. I mean, who knows? I sort of believe it. But it is funny that last minute Christmas vacation pops up the moment you get selected. We've got a couple others. 3 Girly says, if that pilot is testifying, he has to have some sort of immunity for his testimony. Who would be stupid enough to testify in this kind of case unless they had immunity? I agree with you. I think that probably has been worked out. Cora says, Epstein sounds increasingly like some famous sex cult leaders throughout history, which is fine, I guess, if everyone is of age and consents to it. You do you, right? But he's also clearly, as you said, eugenicist. Know who else was? Clinton. When she attended my alma mater, I'll leave everyone to deduce where that was. Good comment there from Cora. Thanks for that. We have News Now says, not really here tonight, but Cuomo was just suspended by CNN. Ooh, we'll have to talk about that one later, News Now. Yeah, he should be fired, obviously. He was using his media resources to help his brother. Spawn Dog says, are we really going to know the truth after this trial? The dirtbags that use this island to pleasure themselves will never be held accountable. What an absolute joke. Well, we're going to see if there is anything that comes from it. But if you're hoping for, an end of the global cabal as a result of this trial, that's probably not going to happen. News Now also says the mother was told about what was going on, kept allowing it to go on, made the victim feel like she was special because of how they were treating her. She should be dragged out in the street and dealt with, says News Now Wyoming, which I think a lot of people would agree with you on that one. Speech Unleashed says, sounds like the parents of these kids knew exactly what was being done to their children and didn't stop it because they were enjoying money and favors. The parents should be prosecuted too. From Speech Unleashed. There are charges for that. There are charges, negligent, what's it called? In Arizona, it's part of the same statute as the vulnerable adult statute. It's negligent entrustment of a child, stuff like that. Like if you entrust your child to somebody that you know is going to abuse them, it's like a negligent entrustment charge. It's escaping. I'm having a brain freeze on that one. We have another one. Nadarb in the house says, it's a long one, so if you need to skip it, go ahead. Says audiophile is that they were calling them these days. Fun fact about Zorro Ranch. According to this article, in 1993, the Zorro Trust, his shell company, completed a purchase of lands owned by members of the King family, a powerful New Mexico agricultural and political dynasty. Zorro's deal included rights to the King's leases on public lands, total of 1,100 acres, rented for $900 a year. I'm assuming that includes the ranch either way. That's quite a deal on all that land. Makes one wonder. Yeah, Epstein got a lot of money in nefarious ways. Very curious. Speech Unleashed says, serious question. Have you ever done voices for reading for audiobooks? The way you voice and emotionalize the trial play-by-play is done very well. Honest compliment. Well, that's a nice compliment, Speech. No, I never have done that or even thought about it at all. Other than I thought about doing an audiobook for my own book because I kind of wanted to do it. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I love them. And there was a good Cyber Monday deal on a lot of those. $5 and a lot of audiobooks that I'll probably never open, but at least they're there. And they'll make me feel warm and fuzzy inside when I look at my Audible. But thank you for that compliment, Speech. That's a nice compliment. We have Three Girlies says, so the defense decides to try to impeach Jane for not reporting until 20 years later. After Epstein is dead, there are more people who keep their abuse quiet for their whole lives and actually report the abuse. Only 25% of abusers ever face charges because of the lack of the reporting by the victims of abuse. This woman could have been quiet for so long until her abuser could no longer harm her or her mother or for any other reason for that matter. Yeah, that's from Three Girlies. And totally understand that, Three Girlies. And I know that you're probably not going to like my take on this thing, but I'm a defense lawyer, and anytime somebody waits 20 years, I'm like, oh, that's perfect, because it's 20 years old, and that is just, way too long for that. I think that, maybe 20 years ago, this was, I think, a little bit more acceptable, but I think as we're sort of moving into this new generation of the Me Too people, sort of the Me Too movement, like if you hold a door open for a woman, you're now a sexual misogynist abuser, is I think how the rules are now. So that's, the environment has changed now. Now everybody is like Jeffrey Epstein and Harvey Weinstein for everything, apparently. But I understand your point, and I understand, it's a serious issue. Three Girlies says, yep, he's suspended indefinitely. Well, we'll see. He should be, like I said, he should be fired. Monster One says, the feds don't allow cameras to protect the identity of victims and informants. All the identities are sealed in this case. How would you be able to film that without exposure to the hidden identities? Well, you could still do, you could still listen to the audio. You could still do what we did in Rittenhouse. We never saw the jurors' faces. We saw it in Chauvin, right? We never saw some of the younger people who testified, the 14-year-olds, never got their names. There's ways to do it. We could have done it. But that was it over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Thank you, everybody, for those amazing questions over there. On YouTube, we're going to wrap it up with some of these very generous super chats. Thank you for sending those in today, my friends. Blasi Uriarty says, check out The Ballad of Kyle Rittenhouse by Clifton Hicks. I will. I'll take a look at that. That sounds fun. I will look at that. Thank you, Blase. We've got Dab Gangsta says, keep up the great show. Well, thank you, Dab. Very generous donation there. No question, but thank you for that. Appreciate you being here. We've got CBDX.com. Says, amazing coverage of this trial. Just want to remind y'all that our Delta 8 products will get you high legally. Use Grueler at checkout for 20% off. CBDX.com. I'm not sponsoring this show. There's no official deal there, but that's just apparently there is an official deal there, but this is the first time hearing about it. So 20% off using promo code Grueler. That's a good way to advertise on the show. Well done, CBDX.com. Well done. Not applicable says, Richards is getting blown the F out by all these objections. That's from Not Applicable. I think that's a Kyle Rittenhouse joke. And we have Not Applicable says, legal question. Can you get in trouble for trying to get yourself dismissed during jury selection to get out of jury duty? Is that a no-no or not? So yeah, it is a no-no. Yeah, I mean, you've got a civic duty. You know, you're an American. It's part of the game. It's part of what we do here as Americans is participate in this, and you should do it. You should, we want good people to be on juries. But yeah, I mean, if you get on there and you try to get off there, the judge is not going to be particularly happy about that. They're not going to let you get off there. And if you do something ridiculous, right, they might hold you in contempt of court for violating the rules. So it's just not worth it. You might as well just do it. And our last super chat over on YouTube comes in from Beth Coddington in the house. And we just love Beth to death. She's so generous on the show. It's too much, Beth. It's greetings, Robert, and everyone. She says, just got to say, sometimes two heads are more useless than one. Merry Christmas to Eric's House. Love you guys over at ericshouse.org. It's a nonprofit we're a part of. Eric's House is doing some amazing stuff. My mother over there just had an interview over with Billy Harfosh over on a local radio show. And so they're doing good work over there. And, it's the holidays. A lot of people are out there grieving. They've lost people they love. And so ericshouse.org is a good place to go if you know somebody who is struggling with grief from a loss, traumatic death, suicide, overdose, COVID losses, sudden losses. ericshouse.org is a place to go for that. And that promo is sponsored by the amazing Beth Coddington, who's sending us over there, wishing everybody very Merry Christmas and lots of love. And I hope Beth Coddington is snuggled up, bundled all up there, watching the show. Every time we do our monthly Zoom meetup, she's over there and just looks cozy as can be. And so that, my friends, is it for the show. Speaking of those cozy meetups, we have one coming up Saturday, December 11th. That is coming up soon, boys and girls, 7 to 8 p.m. Takes place over Zoom. We use real names or fake names, pseudonyms. If you want to testify like a Ghislaine Maxwell victim, you're free to do that. If you want to blur out your face, you're free to do that. If you want to keep the camera off entirely, you're free to do that. But if your camera's off, folks, how are we going to see your ugly sweater? Because it is the holidays, and so we've got Ugly Sweater Edition coming up on Saturday, December 11th. So make sure you check that out. Big new welcomes to Tester 16T. We've got Llama Brad, who's now officially on the board. We've got Kenny HCFC. Starfish 55 is also here joining us for the year. Big shout outs to Starfish. Kenny HCFC, Llama Brad, Tester 16D, and everybody else. You've been on the screen before. We've given you much love and the shout outs. I've got 1 minute left, and so we're just going to squeak on through with the final shout outs. But that, my friends, is it for us for the day. We're going to be back here, same place, same time to do it all again tomorrow. I have other videos that are now going to be coming out because we're kind of keeping the show to one topic. So right after this, I'm going to hop on. I'm going to publish a 12-minute Jacob Chansley video update. He got a new lawyer, John Pierce, who represented Kyle Rittenhouse, and so they filed an appeal. I'm just going to make that video public as soon as we hop off here, so be looking out for that. Otherwise, I will see you right back here tomorrow, same time, same place. Check us out at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button before you exit on out of here. Leave a comment and share this video with a friend or family member, and that is it for me, my friends. Thanks once again for being here. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.